Capital Record, where we defend free enterprise and capital markets because we believe in the dignity of the human person. Hello and welcome to David Bahnsen's Capital Record, brought to you by National Review. There's so many things in the economy right now I could talk about, so many things in markets. There's never a shortage of philosophical things I like to discuss as I try my very best to use this podcast to defend, promote, and uphold a free and virtuous society. But I gotta say, there probably isn't a topic that has dominated more news headlines over the last week now than sports betting. Sports betting has become the biggest discussion that I find relevant to what it is we're doing here in the podcast. And the catalyst for this big increase in news coverage was some pretty major arrests. The FBI arresting the head NBA coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, a couple players in the NBA involved with various sports betting things. One of the allegations against one of the people arrested has to do with the mafia and fixed poker games, but all of it is then overlapped with certain allegations. And again, all of this, of course, are arrests and not yet convictions, but allegations about various players trying to help cook the books to some degree or have an impact in wagers placed around sports activity. In some cases, it could be how many points a player may have in a game. In some cases, it could be a full game. The things seem kind of partial and kind of truncated and not like, throwing a whole season or a team missing playoffs or anything big like that. But nevertheless, the allegations involve the idea of certain things being kind of altered from the integrity of the sport to benefit somebody with money involved in betting, most of which is legal betting that we're talking about here. So it kind of caused me to wonder if listeners of Capital Record would like me to engage the overall subject about sports betting, because here you do have an interesting dilemma, don't you? I say I favor a free and a virtuous society, and that my defense of markets requires me to defend both. That I believe we will lose freedom if we sacrifice virtue, and we will lose virtue if we sacrifice freedom, and that a market economy through a constrained vision represents the best answer when we compare frameworks and systems to everything else. And yet one could say, okay, but then the devil becomes in the details. And where would you draw the line on things like prop bets, where someone is just betting how many rebounds a player is going to have in a given game? And then there's a casino taking the bet, or a house taking the bet, and they're putting odds on it and trying to do so in a way that would be as neutral as possible to them. They are the counterparty in your bet, but if they set the odds in a way that they bring in enough action all over the place, they kind of even out their exposure. They can't ever do it perfectly, but that's the business model. They collect their fees and money, and then players are off basically affecting bets on different outcomes. And it could be something kind of outlier-ish, like how many rebounds a particular player gets in a basketball game. And of course, there's always been the big picture, just people betting on a team to win a game or a boxer to win a match or something like that. And over the years, there's been a lot of corruption around this. There could be crooked things that have happened, but that was generally done in the context of when a lot of this stuff was illegal. And now with DraftKings and a lot of statewide initiatives to expand access, and certainly all kinds of online tools that have massively democratized access to legalized wage betting on different elements of sports. Now, is this something that forces a dilemma for me, where I want the freedom for people to engage in these certain activities, but then there is the threat to virtue by this kind of shady world? Well, before we get to the shady world of people let's say some of these arrests are legitimate or there's convictions. Before we get into the shady world of people fixing things and there being fraud and there being, corruption around it, is the activity itself unvirtuous? And this is what is very tricky for me as a man of faith, because the answer is, of course, both yes and no at the same time. And what I mean by that is that there are all kinds of things people may do recreationally that I don't think are anti-virtuous. If somebody who makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year wants to do a friendly wager with their friend at $20 and it's for fun about a basketball game or a football team that they like or something, I don't think anyone would have a major problem with that. And then on the other hand, if someone who is maxing out their credit card and not paying their rent is trying to go substitute responsible wage earning with financial gambling they cannot afford, that invites a totally different moral scrutiny. And I think the two extremes I used, one that is clearly innocuous and one that is clearly not, are done so on purpose. Because like many things, you have to kind of move outside of those extremes to get into a place where you understand where lines are supposed to be drawn, where boundaries sit. And I think that the first thing I would say is that any desire in the free society that I envision, that I believe in, to replace productive activity with betting on someone else's productive activity is not going to lead to bad behavior like corruption or game fixing or the mafia or some of the other more seedy stuff we're talking about. It is bad behavior. It does not lead to bad behavior. I am not going to defend sports betting as a substitute to productive activity, but nor am I going to condemn sports betting in a context of recreational, affordable, responsible behavior. And once you do, the slippery slope becomes very difficult because people say, no, you could just have fun by saying, I think my team's going to win and you think your team's going to win. Why do you got to put money on it? But of course, the idea that money gets involved in things, are we then going to say what all kinds of commercial activities that to one person seem wasteful, another person does not? And so to the extent that there are lines about responsibility, about affordability, and something being done from a heart of recreation, a heart of entertainment, and not a substitute for productive, useful activity. I guess there's a lot of people that don't find those lines satisfying, but I find them abundantly easy. I just do. And if somebody wants to drill into what is recreational and what counts as productive activity and use some caveat or find an example or whatnot, then fire away. Shoot me a note. Let's get in the weeds. We'll do this. But, don't do that, actually, because I think people asking such questions generally do know the answers. But my point about this is to then, when you talk about the freedom of it, is I'm first talking about what I believe is the virtuous element of working hard, but you're still allowed to have certain recreational activities in a context of fun and responsibility. But then when we talk about the legality, that, hey, David, that's great. That's what you think one should do. And I agree about the morality of it. But when you talk about the state now, where they're advertising to college students or DraftKings and every single thing on ESPN and online sites and this and that are trying to get 20-year-olds to open up accounts and place these bets and this and that. And is the state now going to become a facilitator of what is not responsible gambling behavior? Now, first of all, the state is not the facilitator in that case. And I have a very hard time with the vocabulary of the state permitting something that I might think is irresponsible, and then that being said, that the state is facilitating it. The state is not taking a proactive role in a company advertising a certain way, or B, a consumer behaving in a certain way. The question is, should the state prohibit it? Because the state is not facilitating it. But is the state, by not prohibiting it, turning a blind eye to something that we all know is going to lead to antisocial behavior, to perhaps corruption, to other issues. And this is where I want to challenge us a little bit as one who actually does think this whole space has gotten out of control. That my belief as to how it will get back into the virtuous context or in a place of pure recreation and fun, I don't think fantasy football is damaging society. And when a bunch of companies have a fantasy football league at their office and then everyone pays a small little buy-in fee and there's bragging rights and you're following your players and you're looking at your apps and then you go talk trash the next week. I mean, come on. This is anti-virtuous? Of course not. But it's heavily marketed. It's a big sensation. And then now there are these other elements with prop bets and in-game bets and other things. And so then it's a legitimate question, where should the state intervene or not? And I would suggest that we kind of already know the answer. Because if people want to say this stuff that you think can be innocuous is going to get crazy, I think we already have another example of something in society that I believe most people think should be legal and most people believe can be done for recreation and responsibly and whatnot. And I think most people know darn well that there's a gazillion people where it's going to get out of control and does get out of control, and where the consequences are way worse than somebody's prop sports bets. And that thing is called alcohol. And our country tried prohibition once, and it didn't work very well. And if you believe that there's a vice that is going against the virtuous fabric of society that has done more damage than alcohol, and I will say that it has done more damage than all of the other vices put together based on sheer volume and magnitude because of its democratization and widespread use and abuse, we're fooling ourselves. And yet at the same time, we vehemently defend, as we should, the freedom for people to responsibly drink, and we set laws against certain elements, but you can't set a law against somebody being a good parent and not allowing alcohol abuse to destroy their family. You can set laws against drunk driving, and we have laws against getting in bar fights. But when you look at what it does in the undercurrent of society, we long ago decided that we can't regulate that it's in the freedom of commerce that people are going to be able to buy a drink and sometimes buy 14 drinks. And I think that with this sports betting stuff, maybe one of the best things we could do is allow a 24-year-old who's getting a little carried away on the apps and the DraftKings and the advances on the credit card to have to deal with the fiscal irresponsibility of their decision, what we call touching the stove. And out of that, allow the responsibility lesson to be taught the hard way. Because I don't think for a second that the state getting involved is going to curtail it. And I don't think it's in the state's purview. And yet I'm acknowledging the damage that can be done to a virtuous society from abusive sports betting behaviors. In the meantime, when we get to the thing that started this conversation to begin with, of people allegedly fixing games and so forth, I think you already should have internal regulatory purview and sanction. The NBA is allowed to throw people out, fine them, claw back, all the things. And where there's fraud, corruption, those things still are matters of black and white law. I think you can have laws against that. But then to say the baby with bathwater argument is we've just sort of facilitated a whole gambling ecosystem that now has gotten out of control. I gotta default to a belief system, an individual agency and responsibility. And I think most people already know this to be the case because I do not see people running around asking that we outlaw alcohol. And if somebody is going to make the case that the damage done to others by one person's prop bets and DraftKings and this and that is worse than the damage done to others by abusive drinking, I mean, we're just lying to ourselves. So all at once, the synthesis is available for us to defend the freedom of this activity and, in a context of virtue, believe in it and defend it for the purpose of recreational, fun, and innocuous activity, and to have the lines be drawn around where the state should and should not be intervening. In the meantime, where people are breaking the laws that are leading to this other corruption stuff, of course, may there be justice, equal justice, by the way, under the law. Let's prioritize these things. And that prioritization is a very biblical concept. The phrase weightier matters of the law is not a phrase I made up. It was the very language used by Jesus. So while I would say that if someone is rigging a fourth quarter of a college basketball game and that's against the law, that they should go prosecute fraud or whatever the case may be. But I would also say that we maybe don't need a 2-year investigation and 37 agents that could be out chasing, I don't know, Qatari gangsters and criminals or whatever the case may be, protecting us from the next 9/11. Now, I don't want to ignore any law breaking. I'm just simply saying the weightier matters of the law and proper resource allocation probably applies as well. And every now and then I hear about the resources we put into the major investigations into a poker game, and I just don't know what in the world I'm living through. But be that as it may, I freely confess that I enjoy playing a little blackjack in Vegas. I go out about once a year on business, once a year on fun, and usually it's either or, not both. And I make a pretty good living, and I'm playing blackjack in the context of what I can very easily afford to play. But those that do a little sports betting and are in their fantasy football and they're making prop bets of this and that, look, people have to take responsibility for themselves, and I pray that their recreational decisions, no matter what they may be, even if they don't involve something that has the vice stamp attached to it, like sports betting, that everything we do with our consumption budget should be done responsibly. But is this an area in which state intervention is required, where we want to be a little bit less free of a society so we can be more virtuous? I am here to tell you that the answer is no. And that synthesis of free and virtuous holds up even when we're discussing something like sports betting. So with that said, I hope you've gotten a little bit of application out of this. I certainly welcome charitable disagreement. I know it's a hot topic, but I think we've covered our basics and tried to root the conclusions I'm drawing to the first principles we believe in. Thank you, as always, for listening to David Bonson's Capital Record.